Now, today I'm going to talk about a little bit picking up some important, you know, important aspects of how the research reports are built so that we can work our way back and then connect it with, the, I guess, sampling and the surveys and things like that that we are about to start so that it makes things clearer. So let's show you something here for which I do have to open up the book. Let me do that first. Let's make the book. I don't have the mouse is not working for me today, unfortunately. So I'm using like a finger thing. Um, so now you very good. So here, there we are. I'm going to talk about the client engagement document so that we can cover this as well. That's coming from the module 3. And then in this document flow arrangements, we'll look at the research proposal or how you're supposed to deliver a proposal um, that is in response to the request for proposal. So let me do that. In your book on page 415, you could see that there are these document flows which are defined here. It's an illustration. Starts with the client sending request for proposal. It's we just want to use the abbreviation RFP. In response to that proposal or request for proposal, you're going to send a proposal back to the client. And then once there is a mutual agreement on proposal from your side and the client agrees to it, you're going to draw a contract. So these are the three basic documents, or the three main documents. So I'm going to show you how that flow works and what are the different topics covered in there. This is request for proposal coming from the client. In this, the client gives a little bit of background about themselves. It says company background. Research objective is what is important for you as a researcher to see what is the scope of your research or what the topic is going to be about. So the scope of research work would include things like, the client gives you details like collect business intelligence for product research, best price determination, evaluate product competition and its business market outlook. It's more to do with the product launch. You can tell just by looking at what the client requires. You can tell if it is brand new product they're bringing out in the market, or if it is a competing product that's there, but they require some more intelligence to see if it is going to stay competitive or not. Things like that. So it is basically a market research. Now, if you'd like to read this, it says the client will rely on data collection and data analysis as in quantitative research. So there is an element of quantitative research. Data collection obviously is involved, which has to be mostly numeric in nature as well as qualitative. So it requires both. And then there's analysis techniques that needs to be applied. Analysis of social media with relationship to qualitative analysis, trends and behaviors in the purchase of similar or comparable products in current online markets. The research will also determine product utilization by a particular consumer. So there's going to be consumer research, consumer behavior research. Perhaps there would be surveys or other data collection methods will also be used, but the objective will be to collect both qualitative and quantitative information on that. And then it reads further, the selected firm will be responsible for the development and implementation of a comprehensive and cost-effective market research plan. So you have to give a plan to the client as well. So market research planning you have to do. The more focused part of this scope of your research requires for you to do SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, product analysis, production of creative material, including online surveys, consumer data collection from social media platform, collecting competitors, business intelligence, perform qualitative and quantitative analysis, and so on. So this is a list of things that the client knows what they need, except that your scope can grow larger or it can become narrower or more focused, depending on if the scope is well understood by you or if there's enough detail for you to figure out exactly the time and cost of the project, which is what is going to test your professionalism or your experience in handling the project. And then, of course, you have to look at resources that are in hand, or there are resources that you have to look for from outside as subcontractors. So all of those needs to be figured out. But just because this is a document, which is the initial document requesting for proposal, you can ask more questions to the clients if you need clarification or you need more details. So that when you respond to this proposal or request for proposal, with your own proposal, you have complete knowledge of the actual resources, cost, and budget that would be involved in this. So here is a proposal that you are going to send to the client. And this is based on, see, this is a document that's part of your course, because this is coming from a real event or real situation when we are using this format, or we suggest that this could be a good format to send a response to your clients. We are sharing our own document basically. So this is as real as it gets. And why we are going through this right now is for you to know that understanding or learning about the concepts which we are doing right now. In the previous class, we started with it. You would know the utilization of it in writing your research reports or responding to something from RFP to your proposal to the client. So I'm going to show you, this is basically just giving you a table of contents. You can just go through this one quickly just to see how it looks, because I remember in the exam there is a question which gives you this, gives you a table of content and asks you to which document this would belong to. So you would know that it is coming from response to RFQ. Okay. Then in the beginning, you're giving a background about your company. You are going to talk about the research problem, because remember, the client is not really an expert in writing RFQs or request for quotes. They're not as detailed, or you could say that because it is the first document that's coming not only to you, but maybe something that goes to many others, because here the client is collecting the proposals from prospects to see which one to select. So they are not going to expose or disclose all the information. And they're also not as professional to write a detailed or as detailed RFQs. So that happens. But then your objective as someone responding to this request is to be as much professional as you can and to pick on some of the, I guess, notes, or pick on the vibes you get on what the client is trying to achieve or what the objective might be, and then translate that in a more articulate and more elaborate format. All right. So that's how the approach is suggested here in this document. So we define the research problem as if, it is the missing piece the client couldn't articulate well, and the right wording. So you use hypothesis here or research problem. And it is saying that the client is interested in investing its resources for launching a new product for men that contributes to concealing. And this, like you know, got back to the client and got some additional info. And based on that, you came up with these notes here. It's a new product they're launching that contributes to concealing and covering men's baldness by applying an organic hair fiber solution via hair spray bottle container. Okay. So what are the client interested in investing in resource of launching a new product, a brand new product launch. So they're testing the market. Research objective. The client is online retailer of innovative electronic products for men. eh? Innovative electronic products, okay, from between the ages of 25 to 55. As we understand, client's primary research objective is to make pre-launch decision of a hair simulation spray, whatever product X in this the client wants to research. So here you are saying what the research objective might be. In this regards, the client wants to outsource a comprehensive online market research that covers both qualitative and quantitative research concerning new product viability, optimized pricing, and validates target consumer market. So that's your best understanding. And to the extent the information is given to you, this is how you would expand on, or this is where you're going to expand on rather. And, you know, uh, also share the same idea, the idea with the client, so that if there is any disparity or there's something which you couldn't properly figure out as your objective, the client would be in a position to correct it. analysis. So now, after the research objective, you could see that we wrote online research work to cover the first. So, what are you going to cover, or what is it that you're going to perform as research work? That's stated in 3.1, which is in sync with the research objective. So, product viability, what would you do? Provide information on the size of the opportunity, the competition, and their approach to online market, and explore the needs of customers for the products that are contemplated for the addition to client's existing product line portfolio. So in this regards for product viability, what are you going to perform? You're going to do optimized pricing, which means that you're going to determine what could be the best price for which the client or the consumer are willing to buy this product in the eyes of a consumer, what could be the best value for money for them, and so on, right? And for this, you would probably do focus group or do surveys or things of that sort. Then you have to also going to validate target consumer market. So validation, that means everything that is assumed to be or have you have worked it out based on theoretical data that you have. It is something that needs to be validated. So how are you going to validate that? You're going to give a detail of how you're going to approach it. So what are you going to do? Market research require a complete map of target drivers to establish their likelihood of buying this new product. Would it be for wholesalers? What could be the price? Would that be the target market? You want to go direct as retailer, then what could be the approach? And so it expands on, you know, on the idea of validation. Then you've got to look at the research scope. So in the light of the research scope the client has defined in RFQ, you are, first of all, you're going to see if you can use as many of the common words that's part of the RFQs so that, it's easier for the client to understand and they could resonate with them. And you have not to make it too complicated for their understanding. Perhaps you would use the same wordings like in the scope. I remember it says collect business intelligence for product research was there. Best price determination, which is price versus cost analysis, evaluate product competition and its business market outlook. And so it continues until we come to the exact reports client is requesting, which they have specified in the scope. These include perform SWOT analysis, product analysis, and so on. And if we go further down, you could see that when we now this part number 5 is going to connect with the conventional research method that we are working on right now. Okay, the quantitative methods. What would you do in quantitative method? First, you're going to identify with how you're going to, what would be your strategy for data collection. So you're going to write in data collection for quantitative methods, mind it. First, we're dealing with that. So data collection, for primary data sourcing, you have to identify what would be the primary data sources. That's first-hand information and basically more valuable. You have to be more accurate in terms of defining the cost of it, as well as the effort and time involved in primary data collection. So we've got primary data sourcing, we've got surveys. You're going to conduct cross-sectional and longitudinal research surveys. Now you have to start using these terminologies in your research responses or when you are quoting the client. You have to either educate the client to know or have a better understanding of what these wordings mean for researchers. On the other hand, you cannot do away with or ignore these wordings or technical terms. because these proposals can be used or are probably being compared by other competitors that would be talking in the same sign in the same language, and therefore, in order for you to compete in the industry, you got to stay within the professional ways in which you would be using these words. So cross-sectional longitudinal research in service. What are those? That's what we are going to learn. Then we've got transaction logs. That means you're going to collect recordings or logs of systems or website product sales activities in certain categories of. So you're going to create structured data or logs of information um, in Excel sheet, for example, and then you could build relationships with it, uh, with the data tables. Then competition business intelligence data that is also to be collected firsthand. And how you're going to do that? Analysis of online sales belonging to business competitors for similar products. This is good, real information, sometimes very difficult to get. So it is not only high priced, but it is also difficult when you are trying to reach out to somebody's records to see, or at least have a way of figuring out uh, what could be the sales volume, as well as the products that are, sold from that platform or from the competitor. So these are the three primary data sources. Then you're going to identify the secondary data sources, which is what you're going to maybe subscribe to or gather or collect somehow, which is research reports like from the blogs, from articles written, social forums, and so on. Data subscription, you're going to collect facts and other data, including statistics and financials. Product manufacturing science, scientific data, information and data from the product manufacturer, whoever their vendors are, or those that are putting that product for them from the factory. Is it OEM or branded, non-branded, whatever it might be? That's all going to be secondary data sources. So that is data collection in quantitative sense, where you get the actual numbers. Then you're going to perform the quantitative analysis. So once you've collected that data, then how do you intend to analyze it? What could be some of the ways? And it's all with respect to, or keeping in view, the type of reports the client is requesting. Okay. So each of those reports might require certain types of quantitative and qualitative analysis. Perform quantitative analysis. So what are you going to do to do quantitative analysis? You're going to do survey research, descriptive research, correlational research, cause comparative, quasi-experimental research, experimental research. So all of these 1 through 5 are different ways of or different analytics techniques that you're going to apply. We are not going to cover all of them, but I think we'll be doing survey research and mostly survey research. Then in the qualitative side, for the data that's going to be qualitative in nature, the data collection method you will do is online qualitative surveys, gather customer behavior and trend data from social media data capture sources. So this is going to be your methods you're going to apply for qualitative analysis. So what would be the actual analysis you would do? You would do data visualization, sentiment analysis, qualitative comparative analysis, content capture, and text analytics. So all this is actually identified and defined in your plan for before you can put or translate it into cost and time. And therefore, you're going to complete the proposal or give a quotation to your client, prospective client at this point. You're going to identify your research team, your resources, you just flex your muscles a little bit to let them know, who is on board with you in your research So you give the details of the team. Then next is going to be the timeline chart for research project deliverables. And this you could see right here, you've got a timeline chart, which is actually, you could see in this chart, it has different phases of your research project. In the first phase, you are going to do your planning, sitting with the clients, what is involved in that, finalize research contract, review scope, develop research plan, obtain approval by the client. All these are different things that you can foresee that at the planning stage you would need to cover. A little bit more on the remarks, somewhat more giving details of what is involved in the phase. Uh, okay, so draft research plan to be approved by the client, methodology and approach to research finalized, and research contract signed, advance prepayments, etc. So a little bit extra. Let's call this a column where you're going to put some extra remarks. And right next to it, you've estimated that it would take about 14 days to cover this, or the planning stage. Okay. Then in the second phase, data collection and procurement, finalize data sampling, develop custom surveys, obtain validation, and so on. So the second phase would take 14 days. Then comes the third phase where you're going to actually, once you've collected the data, you're going to do research and analytics, 22 days. Phase 4 draft a report, 10 days. So it's giving the client the idea of different stages or different phases where you have these milestones you will be covering. And this is based on the best estimation at the time of the proposal. Um, and when you're giving your estimation, there is going to be a lot of legal things or legal disclaimers you're going to put in. You're going to emphasize that this is just an approximation, and you're going to give exceptions where the scope might increase or decrease. There could be some contingencies. There are going to be some eventualities for which, or unforeseen events for which you're going to keep a provision, some out-of-pocket costs and expenses. You want to cover that also. So all that will be mentioned as part of your at this time of the proposal. You're going to put those as some of the things that would give you enough room that at the time of signing your final contract, this would be something that the client will have to will have to make sure that they don't ignore as far as cost and budgets are concerned, so that they know that it can be flexible and it can increase or decrease. So altogether 60 days. And then another most important thing, you're going, because you've given the timelines or estimation of how long it will take to complete those phases, you also have to now build in the cost or projected cost of your research. Um, so this is what you will be using as a very straightforward um, estimation chart, where you're going to define the costs and identify the different cost points. Okay, so you've got here consulting charges, expert levels. Expert levels, you have to, in research work, there are different expertise or different levels of research or different staff levels involved, let's say. So, you have to separate them for the sake of costs. You have to look at them as having a certain level of expertise. So expert level 1, 2, and 3. So this is, and different levels means that different tasks or different volume or value of work is assigned to them, and therefore the cost varies. So 30,000, 49,000, 6,000, total 85,000. And so it continues. And then you've got fixed costs and variable costs. So when we are doing the module 3, we will tackle this in more detail. And that is not going to be a long time before we get to it. Maybe in the next class, we'll start with it. So it will tell you what are the overheads, variables, fixed cost, and so on that you have to account for or not make sure not to ignore them. So that's the cost. And then, like I said, there's a little bit of disclaimer here. And then the final product of all this is the agreement, which is the main binding contract between your client and yourself. Um, and that is when you are ready to start the research work for your client. So we don't have to go through the entire um, details here on the research contract. It's a lot of pages, I see. Important thing is that you know get a sense or use it as a reference. This contract is again a real document, and it works quite well both in US and Canada. Obviously have to make some adjustments, but most of it is a Canadian side of contract. um, but you're most welcome to use it if you'd like, but we don't take responsibility because of the legalities that might be uh, you know, particularly for USA might be slightly uh, need to be consulted with your attorney. Anyway, so that's the documentation. Now I will go back and we will continue with where we left on the slides that we were doing, because this part we covered is from module 3. Mm, okay, we'll see if we can do sampling. But let me just do the surveys part. So I'll take a break now. I'll see you in about 10 minutes, and then we'll look at surveys. Okay. And I'll show you different ways in which we like to define or identify with different formats of questionnaires, uh, specifically for survey type, not for the polls. There isn't a lot that we need to cover on the polls. So mostly it's going to be surveys. And I'll see you in a little bit. So let's take a break. Hi, Tristan, I'm back. Should we continue? You there? Okay, there you are. So let's look at the page you have in your book. It's page number 364. There are two types of surveys that we will talk about. One is called cross-sectional and the other one is called longitudinal survey. Cross-sectional means that the survey questions are such, or the nature of the topics is such that you can ask all the questions at the same time, and that would suffice. Like it is not a research that is long term and is not evolving. It is something that would have ready answers available for you if you put that survey in front of someone. So that is cross-sectional survey. An example of this is relationship between peer pressure and cigarette smoking among teenagers as of May 2010, for example. Another example can be a student perception following the completion of the first academic year, student behavior following a promotional campaign, and so on. Anyway, this is for the events that has happened already, or you're not waiting for anything to evolve, change, or alter later on and within a certain span of time. That is cross-sectional. Longitudinal is, like I said, exactly where things are changing and evolving and moving with time. So that is longitudinal surveys, where data changes. Longitudinal surveys are used in cohort studies. A cohort is relationship which you can attach to any future events, panel studies and trend studies. So those are just for you to know, FYI, okay, cross-sectional and longitudinal. Then there are sampling techniques which are important for us to understand that when we are doing surveys, we can't put everybody or make everybody part of the study. Okay, so we have to pick a sample may have different types or different arrangements, and the sampling has to be non-biased, obviously, for the reasons that it should become an acceptable sample size. And there is a method to obtaining samples. Means that it cannot be erratic, or it cannot be something that you just, I mean, there are ways or there are situations where you have to be selective, or there could be bias involved in picking up the samples. But that is when you can't find enough people for the study group, or there has to be a peculiar trait or homogeneity of some sort between the subjects of your sample, and for which you have to make that extraordinary effort to collect them or recruit those samples. So there could be a bias involved, or there could be something which may not be randomized, or there might not be a method to it. But we'll get to that later. But first, let's look at some of the ways in which we can obtain a sample from what we call a population. A population is something which you could say call a target market. And I'm talking in terms of research, market research, and whatever you're going to obtain or select from there could be a consumers or customers, or someone that you feel should be part of the sample. And therefore, that kind of research would require for you to identify the population first, and then look at the sample out of it. I think we have these in the slides that I'll take you to. We did the data types already. Okay. So we will also look at observations, or okay, interviews, focus groups, document. We did this one as well. So I think we are now on the sampling, and these are the slides I can share with you. The data sampling methods, there are two types of methods. One is called probability sampling, and the other one is non-probability sampling. So what is probability? Probability is a chance of something happening or not happening. What could be the ratio, percentage, or means of figuring out the outcome of something? Could be an event, or it could be a chance that you take when you are comparing more than one item or looking for more than one object, and the chance of one coming before or after, as if it is a flipping of a coin, for instance. So the probability of a heads coming or a tails coming, that's has to do with, or would have a certain mathematical way of figuring out, and that is the probability of one thing happening or another happening. So with the probability sampling methods, we've got simple random sampling, stratified sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling. And within these headings, or within these classification, there could be other sub classifications as well. And there are more methods that are coming, depending on the nature of the data and how you obtain it. Sometimes the sampling becomes challenging and it requires additional methods. Even mechanically, this is possible also, depending on how you're going to set your algorithms. The ranking, for example, is in the search engine is also a sort of a sampling, or it is a kind of randomization, a probability of some of the things coming up or not coming up. So probability sampling we face even in our minds. We are doing that kind of thing when we are making selection or making a choice, because everything is limited, or there is affinity to it. It's nothing infinite in our lives mostly. So all the time there are choices. But in the case of obtaining a sample size, we are going to use probability sampling techniques. Simple random means a chance of something happening, as if more than one choice is available. One would have a 50% chance, the other one also have an equal chance. So if it is a flipping of a coin where 50% of a chance of heads coming and 50% tail coming, that is simple random sampling. Or where we have, like, let's say in the raffle tickets, for instance, you could put the numbers inside the box and you can just, without looking at it, or just putting your hand in there and pulling one out. That's simple random sampling. So if it is 100 numbers and you're going to put one, then the chance of any number happening is 1 to 100. Okay. So that is simple random sampling. Let's look at how it is identified here. Mm, okay, stratified sampling, mm, systematic sampling, stratified sampling. Okay, so that was simple random. Now I'm going to talk about stratified sampling. You know, this sampling techniques sometimes become very complex, and you have to justify your samples by identifying it with the techniques that you have used to do that randomization or to find that sampling. So in the stratified sampling, we'll show you the example of what it means by strata or stratified is actually creating stratas. Stratas are groups that are intermediary, or they're collected in between process of doing randomization of sampling. But those randomization has some sort of what do you call the some sort of organization to it. Okay. And those stratas that you create, or those groups that you create, are intermediary. And that's what strata would mean. So let's see, we have a sample size or a population of 1,000 employees, assuming. Now, from this employee set, you need to figure out a way of obtaining the sample, knowing well that 1,000 employees would make 800 females and 200 male. So the ratio here is I guess 8 is to 2, or females are 800, and because males are 200, then there is this sample that you have to obtain that represents the population, or it is representative of a population that maintains a specific uh, kind of a ratio between male and female. So what you will do is that you're going to create a strata, because you don't want to take all 1,000 employees. And your objective is to take a sample size of 100 employees. Then logic would dictate that in order for you to maintain the integrity of the sampling, which is non-biased, you want to maintain this ratio within 100. Hold on, sorry. You've created two stratas or two groups. One is going to be a sample of 80 females, and you're going to take 20 males. So basically what you did, the total is 100 employees as you wanted, and yet you maintain the ratio 80-20 by selecting 80 females and 20 males, so that it is representative of the group or the population. And then you're going to call these stratas or in between groups, which is, males and females. And when you put 80 and 20 together, you got a sample size of 100 employees. So basically you use the stratas, or you make two stratas to maintain that ratio. There was stratified sampling or simple strata sampling. Then there is systematic sampling or systematic stratified sampling, you could even call that, but let's just say systematic sampling to make it simpler. In systematic sampling, there is a slightly more problem, which means the population is such that you cannot just divide male, female. There could be other attributes also, which would need to be common, or at least you would identify with the population by using those attributes and maintain that segment or that ratio. Uh, However, there is a mathematics involved in this sort of systematic sampling, and I'll show you how that is. Where is my cursor? Okay, so let's suppose from the population you have a sample employees that you need to take out or figure out what could be the best way of selecting employees without uh, you know, without making it a biased choice. So you will have to make some arrangement in terms of identifying each individual employee by not looking at their name, but rather, you're going to give them a number. So let's suppose there is an employee number 1011021. So you could be, 1,000 employees, let's say. And then let's say you want to select every sixth employee out of that. So 106, then there will be 10112, and so it will continue 118. So you're selecting every sixth employee. It wouldn't matter if it is male or female, but just so that you have randomized it, but there is a structure to it, or there is a manner, or there is a way of how you are going to make those selections by identifying each employee by giving it, let's say, the sixth or eighth or every 10th employee. And that way, you don't you make it a totally independent mathematical formula which is applied throughout, and therefore it is also represented or representative of the population, because the population is homogeneous in terms of attribute, or it fulfills the objective of the characteristics that you need for selection of those employees. So you're going to do systematic sampling, and therefore for the sample employees. Let's suppose you had selected every sixth employee, and this is what is shown here in the orange. So this one that is in the yellow color could be the sixth one. And when you select all these sixth or every sixth employee, you come up with a sample of 100 people. Okay, so basically it has a system to it, it is a structure to it, it's identified as more systematic than the previous method. Okay. And then we've got cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a method where you have a lot more area to cover, or you have the objective of obtaining certain data from, let's say, different locations of a business, or there could be a manufacturing department, or there could be a management department separate from manufacturing, and there could be a distribution or retail outlets, that could be another sort of set of departments within the organization, but they are geographically separated. But you want to make it a cluster or a mix of things which is goes beyond the employees alone, but it is more focused on the um, type of activity that is done in those locations. But you need that sample as a mix of those activities overall. So you're going to do cluster sampling. An example of cluster sampling is shown here, where, and you have to assume that each of these circles are different geographic locations. And what is called a cluster here is identified with this oval shaped background, or this yellow colored highlighted portion, which is picking up, let's say, three different locations. And in location one, for instance, it is a product development department, and you're looking for managerial position. This is another flavor to it. Like, in besides the activities, now we are looking at positions, which is managerial positions, let's say from group one or location one, assuming that all these circles or all of these locations that you see here, this one, three of them, are actually doing the similar things, except that within each location you have you want to select different level of employees. So from location one, you have selected managerial position. Location two, still the same product department, but production workers. In sample three or group three, this should be group three anyway, supervisor or foreman position. So there is the cluster that you created here. And from this cluster, you could see that we have selected different positions of employees. But because the locations are different, we're calling it a cluster sampling. This is the simplest way of explaining, with the CIRS course. The objective obviously is to familiarize the researchers who are doing online research, that have no clue about these concepts, or at least would understand the importance of knowing these concepts, and they can go further deeper into this later on if they want to to learn more about the professional research work. So they get to actually look at where it starts from and then dig in deeper. This is the objective of CIRS, to familiarize you with this concept, and then also to emphasize the importance of knowing these things, for your research. We also have a multi-stage sampling, which means that sometimes the population size is so big, and your research work requires for you to filter in or filter out certain prospects by qualifying them, by pre-qualifying it in the first go, then qualifying it further. And so it becomes like a multi-stage sampling. Okay. Example of multi, and this is the last one we'll discuss, so we don't do a whole lot in detail. Sampling in itself is, sometimes it gets mathematically very complicated. But right now, that complication is not required. So you've got multi-stage sampling. Supposing there is the objective for you is um, to obtain student sampling, okay, in from the school districts, and let's say it's entire USA, for instance. Now imagine the sample size that you have to obtain. So you're going to do multi-stage sampling. In population of US school children's, you're going to first look at the different states, like how many schools are there in each state, depending on whether it's private schools you're looking for or public schools or all those different ways in which you can identify with different types of schools. So population, and then, middle schools, high schools, or primary schools. Anyway, just assume that this is the different these this is a big circle, and in these are smaller circles, different colors. These could be the different states. So you're going to make a simple random sampling out of this. And in the second stage, what you decided is that from the simple random sampling, you selected one, two, three, four, five, let's say five states, and in these five states, you are further going to use randomized sampling or any other sampling method you want, but you have the option to use any kind of sampling method. So even in stage one, you can use simple, stratified, or not, depending. You can, in second stage also, you can do further sampling or reducing the size of it further by using another sampling technique, but it is in stages. So in the second stage, let's say we have five of these states. From these five states, you are selecting the schools. Now, from the states, you're going to separate the schools. Here, you selected the states in first. In the second one, you're selecting the schools, and you're right now we're just applying simple random sampling. And once you have the state selected, then schools will be selected in stage three. In stage four, students are selected from those schools. So that's just going from one stage to another, and you can use different sampling techniques at every single stage. This is called multi-stage sampling. Okay. Uh, we so far we've talked about probabilistic sampling or probability sampling, which means that there was a method to it, and the even randomization is a method of probability sampling. But then there is another method which makes selection of sample proactive, where you are actually in command of selecting your own sample, which could be your according to your specification, according to your needs, and you can actually uh, use your own discretion to look for that sample. Okay. Mostly in clinical trials, you need those proactive, non-probabilistic sampling techniques, because there could be disease, certain symptoms, certain special attributes, or certain characteristics that fits those individuals or your subject of sampling, for which you have to look for and be very specific to find them according to your requirement. So that becomes proactive, non-probabilistic sampling. I mean, these are like these four different kinds. Nothing very special about them. These are all, since they're all proactive, it doesn't even matter what name you give them. Okay? But let's suppose we have something called convenience-oriented sampling, which means that you want sampling to be happening from your own group of people or the people who know someone. Okay. um, and you are not the one who has to go look for it, but you have other people within the same group, or it could be a group for which where you were actually part of the group, and you were asking your colleagues to become part of the sample. That's convenience sampling, meaning you don't have to do any effort. Voluntary response sampling, or you could say volunteered sampling. Volunteered is when you give incentive to people, or give bonus, or pay them something, or compensate them in certain ways, and they are more than happy to become part of the sample. So that is volunteered sampling. Purposive sampling is when the mm, when certain your purpose of sampling is served by just finding anybody which does not have to have a particular characteristics, or it is generic in nature. So that is purposive sampling. Then you've got snowballing sampling, which means that you're going to involve one person or a few person around you that is going to get more people into the group. So you delegate the collection or recruitment process to others around you, and it creates a snowballing effort. So one person can get three, the three can get nine, and so on. So that is snowball effect, and that is snowballing sampling. Anyway, that's covers the sampling techniques. Now, before we get to data analysis, okay, what is data analysis? Let's look at that. So data analysis, it is just a definition. I don't know if it's going to be part of the exam, but no harm in just going through it at quickly. So it is analyzing information. To me, what data analysis means is analyzing the data, both qualitative or quantitative, primary or secondary sources, whatever source might be, to 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 utilize it in such a way that it can create a relationship and create an information which would be meaningful enough that it would allow for the management decisions to be made, or it would be comprehensive enough that it would allow someone to act upon with the comfort of knowing that they have a knowledge which is backed by the data itself, that otherwise would be difficult if it was if the data was not correlated or it was not analyzed. So that is a relationship game mostly. So researchers, through careful scrutinizing data for any patterns, relationship, trends, etc. So that's what it is going to tell you is a pattern, relationship, trend. These are some of the ways in which the analysis are becomes purposive, or it is fulfilling the purpose of analysis. The purpose of analyzing data is to obtain usable and useful information. The analysis, irrespective of whether the data is qualitative or quantitative, may describe and summarize the data, okay, identify relationship between variables, compare variables, identify the difference between variables, forecast outcomes. So whatever it may be, what we covered with these uh, tabs is actually analyzing the data enough that you would be in a position to make a decision where to go, what the trends are, what the pattern is. And based on that, you can also do some predictions or do forecasts. So that is data analysis part. Let's look at the time right now, 2:15. Okay. So we'll talk about grounded. So in the qualitative data analysis, we'll look at analytic induction, grounded theory, page 421, 422. Let's pick this up from the book. Let's do it from the book. I think even before we get to the analytics, let's continue with the data collection. Since we did sampling, we'll continue with data collection. We'll do the analytics after this. So there is two kinds or two ways in which we can collect information using surveys. Surveys are different from polls, by the way. Polls is also some another method in which you can get quick answers to a question. They're not as elaborate. They're just easy to answer, and basically it identifies with the common population and not a very specific group. In the exam, there could be a chart that they would want you to uh, fill in some of the blanks for, and this is quite common for them to give a chart such as this one. This is 358 page, and they like you to differentiate between surveys and polls. You could see that this chart could be useful if you just look at what are the differentiators. For instance, a survey questionnaire can include several questions across a wide range of question types, such as multiple choice, rating, short. There are different types of questions in surveys, whereas in polls, there's generally one question, which is multiple choice, simple yes or no answers, or it is dichotomous in nature, or bivariate. Bivariate is two answers, questions and answers. A survey questionnaire can gather opinions on multiple topics and help determine this, because these survey questionnaires are structured, they're designed, and you need an expertise to create a survey questionnaire. And then there are certain legalities that would prevent you from asking certain types of questions. Then, there are methods of how you're going to draw the conclusion using those survey questionnaires. There is a method and methodology to surveys, where in polls it is not as complex. So here in the second one, it is saying that the topics, so topics can be start as a broad topic, and then it can taper down, become more focused at times. It is designed in such a way that if you don't answer certain questions by picking or giving certain type of answers, it won't take you further, or it could just conclude for you much quicker. And so there are techniques to surveys. In polls, there is not anything like that. In polls, gather opinions on a single topic. Surveys can take longer to answer. Of course, polls is a matter of seconds. Surveys require more time to gather responses, and analysis is needed. Like in surveys, you can also create multi-stage surveys where one stage is completed, and if the score is certain numbers, or you are of the opinion that it can be taken to the next level, you would do that, and so on and so forth. So it could be not at the same time, but it could evolve also. So surveys are, again, not comparable to polls in terms of not only complexity, but in terms of design, forms, and its own format. So just 3 page 358, no harm in looking at it, or at least at a glance you would know that where one column is for surveys and the other one is for polls. They might try to confuse you between not giving you differentiator, or not hiding like survey or polls. You would know where to put the word polls and where to put the word surveys. It's This question keeps coming over and over, so just so you know. So anyway, I'll get to this one later. I think I would do the survey types first. Stick to the book. Okay. Now let's look at this chart here. Surveys, we're not talking about polls. There is not a whole lot written about the polls in the book. So looking at the surveys, there are two type of survey questions basically. So understanding what those types are. There is again, there is a longitudinal and cross-sectional. Longitudinal is the same concept that we talked about in earlier. Longitudinal surveys is like one-time answer for something. Cross-sectional, it just goes from one period to another. But let's follow this um, thing here. Question types. There are two types of questions, close-ended and open-ended. Open-ended are more descriptive, and one has the usually open-ended questions. You give your own personal opinion, or where the subject for your survey or anyone that is answering that question, it's giving their own personal opinion on something, or it is you intentionally want someone to disclose their mind by writing something about that topic. So that is open ended, and usually it is designed by not making it a detailed question, but making it broad enough that it is not identifying with certain specific or the specifications about something or for someone, but rather it is we'll look at the open-ended sample question also, but it is not giving you a multiple choice, or it is not giving you a choice of answers. So you can write anything that is in descriptive. So that would be open-ended, but mostly it is close-ended question that we are interested in, so that it is more controlled and we are in command of asking and for getting the answers for the exact questions to which we need those answers for. So close-ended questions are different types, and they're given these names which are commonly understood across the industry for those that actually build those survey questionnaires or specialize in conducting surveys. They understand this terminology. There is the type of questions which are called dichotomous. There is Likert scale, semantic differential, rating, ranking, multiple choice, and fill in the blanks. So these are different flavors of it, of close-ended questions. And let's look at these examples. In the exams, you will get, the formats or illustrations of the type of questions and how they are formatted or how they are presented. And you would see these sometimes in the final exams, the way they're set. You could see that, they've got like different formats, and each of these are given a name, and that's what we'll look at. So first, let's look at dichotomous questions. How do they look like? Dichotomous means that there would be definitive answers. There would be two bivariate answers, like two answers, yes or no, good or bad. And that's how you would know that this is dichotomous. Like this one, do you believe a clothing store should be yes or no? Two answers. Then you've got multiple choice questions. Multiple choice we are all familiar with. They're given a lot of choices from which you have to select one. So this is multiple choice right here. Then we've got rating questions. Rating questions are qualitative mostly. Uh, like how often do you purchase lunch in the company's cafeteria? Very frequently, frequently, occasionally, seldom. So this is qualitative data, you could see. And in fact, multiple choice in this case is giving an example of qualitative data also. But rating question is definitely qualitative in nature, like 1:10 in the scale of 1:10, and how frequent, those kind of things. Likert scale is a little bit more complicated because it has two dimensions. Likert means that you can write it. Let's suppose it is disagree, somewhat agree, or agree. Somewhat agree is not a true answer. So there is always a level of answer which is very difficult to interpret or even to make sense out of, because it is not definitive. So what do you do is that you refine it further, or prompt the person who is answering the question to take it a step more. And this is how you would like to further get a more better answer. So you can make it look like this. So let's suppose consumers so here overall, do you think trade globalization is good for question mark? And this says agree, somewhat agree, and disagree. Now here you're giving it a number 1, 2, and 3. Now you can, somewhat is 2 here, but you can further rewrite it as consumers like you, companies in your country creating a job. Okay, so agree, somewhat agree. Never mind. I think this is a totally different set of question. So semantic differential versus Likert scale. Semantic differential is a scalable question, or it is on a sliding scale. So if it is bad, it is 1. If it is good, it is number 7. Okay. Unimportant. So unimportant is not as good of an answer, but because it is given this thing 1, 2, 3, 4, a scale, so it sort of makes it slightly better answer. So where you have in the Likert scale, disagree, somewhat agree, and agree, and somewhat agree is troublesome, you can convert this into a differential scale also. So to make it appear like this. Ranking question, when you have to give a choice um, between the order in which you would like to put your preferences. Like if your company required you to transfer to one of the following cities, what would be your order of preference? Denver, Miami, you could put 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, and so on. Okay, so this is ranking. So preference, it is a preference or individuals' own liking to rank something as acceptable, less acceptable, least acceptable, or not acceptable in that sense. So these are ranking questions. Just so that looking at the format, you can tell if it is ranking question or it is Likert scale or semantic differential. That is important to know. And that's probably what you will be tested on in the exam, so that the examiner wants you to actually identify with, or at least look at the question to know how you would name it, or what could be the name the name of the format. Checklist is another one. Which of the following would you like to see in cafeteria? Okay, so it is definitive choices. Okay, you could have more than one answer. In the ranking question, you can have more than one answer, or the a la carte choice that you have would allow you to fill in all the missing numbers here. Mhm. Then, of course, there is fill in the blanks. Now, open-ended questions ask respondents to supply answer. No predefined answers are given, so respondents are free to write what they want. This method is typically avoided in surveys and polls for various reasons. An example of an open-ended question can be, what could we do to make your experience more enjoyable? It becomes a generic question. Anyone can answer with their best mind, or the thoughts could be different, or they could be translated differently, the same idea, you know. So it is more open in that sense. All right. Now coming to analytics. Now, what are the analyzing qualitative data? Um, in the qualitative data analytics, the way in which we collect the qualitative data is given or is preferred to be given a certain type of data collection method, like observations, interviews, and focus groups, for instance. So let's look at them by reviewing. uh, Did we do focus groups, interviews, and I am not sure. I'm just thinking whether we covered it or not. Yeah. Did we do this? Observation techniques, interviews, focus groups, document studies. Did I talk about these already? Do you recall, Preston? Okay. So let's talk about these then. Now, observation techniques usually are okay. Thank you for that. So, observation techniques are something that are more given a bad name because there could be a bias involved in this. When we do our data collections, like we may have like a preconceived ideas or beliefs of some sort that prevail or would tarnish the impartiality concept. And examples of observation could be, let's say, social experiments. For instance, you are videotaping something on the street, or you are doing uh, you know um, a randomized interviews about a topic which could be very sensitive. You're talking about abortions, you're talking about women's rights, sometimes you're talking about the racism and so on. So, you have to look at the situation or surrounding environment in order for you to, or set up that environment or sit somewhere where you can actually do direct observation. But to collect that information, you need to be organized enough that, you have covered mm, different aspects of how you are going to approach that observation. For instance, if it is social experiment you're doing, then you have to keep few people informed about what you're doing, and then after you have made your observations, you have to share it to get some permissions. You to also make sure that there is informed consent, a document, especially in North America. That document needs to be signed. So informed consent on where you're going to use this or how you intend to use it, whether it's going to be for commercial or non-commercial requirements, and whether the subject is vulnerable population or not, they're over 18 or under 18 and so on. So all that legalities needs to be covered. So observations can become complex, but what is really important in these observations, besides the legal aspect, is whether it is to be assumed or considered to carry a non-biased opinion, or the notes that you're giving are whether or not they're vetted by more than one person. Then we've covered surveys and polls. In interviews, it is more kind of interactive, and it is, it could be in-depth interviews or it could be generic interviews. In-depth could be with personalities, people with, who are qualified or professionals or experts in certain area. So that could be in-depth. In-depth can also mean that you have to not only make notes, but you can actually make your own observation, besides just the answering of the questions, which can also be achieved through surveys. But in interviews, it is not only interactive, but you can ask personal questions. You can ask leading questions. You can actually derive some value based on the additional information that is extracted from the subject of the interview, or whoever could be. Usually interviews are one to one, but it could be one to few or one to many, or there could be more than a few experts involved. Um, but the best idea for doing interviews is to ensure that they are discussed ahead of time, all the disclaimers or anything that needs to cover legal um, permissions and legalities uh, are taken or are given to you ahead of time. Um, the interviews also involve certain questions which you cannot put in surveys, for instance, uh, and you can derive more questions, or you can build more questions based on the answers given to you. In the focus groups, you want to make sure that the group is representative of the sample, and that focus group has common attributes, or the problem or the nature of discussion is such that they have um, common goals and common expertise as a group, and they understand the objectivity of this, or what would be the outcome that you expect out of this focus group. So it is well known, but not in interviews. Another aspect of focus group is that sometimes focus group involves people with different ideas, or may intentionally be a group that would carry different beliefs on certain subjects. So even that could be a focus group. So there's two aspects to it. And the idea obviously is to solve something or to achieve a common goal. Um, there are, in the case of virtual world where we are talking about internets, virtual focus groups are very common these days, because it is, first of all, very convenient, and second of all, there is somewhat, once you've collected the information, you can edit it. In interviews, sometimes you can't do that, but in focus groups, it is something for which, you can, virtual can be, mm, it's convenient. Let's just call it convenient for now. We can read about it a little bit more in the book. I will go through it after we get done with just the brief intros on this. Then we've got document studies. Document studies, anything that is available in paper or electronic format that you study specifically. It could be books, articles, research papers. And then you've got case studies, which is a situational study of events or things that can be assumed or it could be real. It could be a reference to something which has happened, and something that we have learned from. So those are case studies. Now let's look at them in the books to get a detail of what it means. Okay, not at that. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. So in the focus group, you could see that it is on page 334. Um, that it is the interaction of individuals, their insights or their opinions that match or may not match does not matter, but that is a very big information when there are arguments, new data is produced. So that is the dynamics of it. um, and of course, usually it is 5 to 10 people who share some characteristics relevant to the evaluation. Originally used as market research tool to investigate the appeal of various products, the focus group techniques has been adopted by other fields such as education as tool for data gathering on a given topic. So, whenever there is a focus group and there is interaction that sort of either agrees or disagrees, or so many people agree and that many people did not agree on certain things, that in itself is a data which a lot of people don't realize, but has a lot of importance in terms of figuring out both the qualitative and quantitative aspects of what the outcome was on on a particular issue. So that is the main advantage of it. Now let's look at the interview. Interview is on page 333. So there are two types of interviews. Okay. Um, at least what used to be phone interviews or paper and pen surveys before. Now let's talk about the virtual interviews. These are structured interviews in which a carefully worded questionnaire is administered. And so the difference between focus group and interviews, usually based on my personal perspective, is that not everything you can gather from the interviews, but a lot can be achieved by using focus groups instead. In interviews, it is more focused on individual on a certain topic, and it is something that you drive on your own because you are in control of asking the questions. But in focus group, it can go in different directions, and sometimes you gather more energy and information out of that conversation that can only be done in focus groups versus interviews. But anyway, coming back to what is in-depth interview, there is structured interview, which is a given script of questions. Then there is in-depth interview in which the interviewer does not follow a rigid form. In the former, the emphasis is on obtaining answers to carefully phrased questions. Interviewers are trained to deviate only minimally. In in-depth interviews, the interviewer seeks to encourage free and open responses. These may be a trade-off between comprehensive coverage of topic and in-depth exploration of more limited set of questions. So, I mean, it is logical, and obviously we observe it every time that we look at how you know the the media correspondents are asking questions, they're doing interviews. They have a certain way or certain line they follow, a certain sequence of questions which is actually collected or designed for specific reasons. And then there are other times when there is a streak of in-depth interview of sorts where they leave the questions more open, or they can build questions on top of what the answer is given back. Um, so document study. And so, okay, so after we get done with this part, let's look at the analytics. Mm, Qualitative data analytics, there are two types. One we call analytic induction, and the other is grounded theory. Um, for example, if there is, let's look at the definition. Analytic induction refers to a systematic examination of similarities between various social phenomena to develop concept or idea. It is most common analysis of qualitative data based on the observer's impression. So anything that you can gather or gain insight upon by just looking at it, or at that very moment that you're collecting that data information, that is analytic induction. But the grounded theory means that you don't get an answer to something because the nature of the problem or social experiment is such that it requires for you to actually start with the basic question, and then with time you do more observations and you find that things are changing, or you might just end up you know uh, asking even more questions than you came up with initially. So with time it changes, so it evolves, and that becomes a grounded theory. So what grounded theory in definition means: the research begin with raising a generative question which helps guide the research but is not intended to be static or confining. So, the question on something, or the problem that you start with, may become more complicated, or it may take a different direction totally, because you are basically embedded in that environment. So in social sciences or in social experiments, sometimes you have to live the life somewhere with the people or the environment, to get a better sense of what is on the ground realities, and therefore it would change your perspective and change your direction of doing your research. That is grounded theory. Now, to collect the information in qualitative research, there are different ways in which you can do that, because even those ways are given the name. For instance, there is a something called coding, which means that it is like hashtags. Coding means that you don't want to write elaborate notes, but you have a common idea or common words that in your writing or in your observation, that is highlighted more, and that becomes like a coding or an idea, or the main idea circulating around the the details of it. So it is like a hashtag or a topic of something that would have a meaning. For example, okay, so I don't have the examples right now, but anyway, that is, like I said, it's like a hashtag. Then you've got memoing. Memoing means that it's a freehand writing. You're writing memo or writing something that is going to start with a general or generic um, thoughts, and then it is going to evolve into something very specific, where you even end up finding new topics just by writing notes. So memoing is, for the sake of how it is to be understood in collection of qualitative data, is freehand writing or making notes like in your diary. So coding versus memoing: coding is short form, and it has a coded wording or names of something which has a more detailed meaning. Memoing is freehand writing. Okay. uh, Integrative diagrams is that you can basically make relationship diagrams, you can make causes and effect diagrams, but it requires for you to sit somewhere and design it. And therefore it has, you have to be familiar with a cohort um, diagrams and so on. So there could be there is so many different ways that you can create integrative diagrams. Okay, and for the purposes of research, those diagrams can be made later on when you go back with your memoing and coding, and you start using application. There are softwares that would actually help you to draw that. Then Okay, so integrative diagrams and sessions. Okay, you can even draw cartoons as far as, okay. So, and the quantitative data analytics, we are talking about statistical methods mostly. That's all we are going to talk about because of the scope of our CIRS course. We just want to touch upon something which you must have actually dealt with in your high school days, um, like mean, mode, median, for instance, where certain values or certain numbers need to be considered. Taking an example of sampling techniques, like there was a median that we applied, like every sixth number, that was median. Mean is average, average number total. You're going to add the number, then divide it with the total number of those numbers. Um, and median is the nth, or the highest point somewhere, or the highest number. So that is the difference between mean, mode, and median. I don't want to discuss it in the class because it is typically ABC. You can actually look it up in the book. You could see what it means. It is giving averages, like, adding all these numbers, dividing with the quantity of these numbers. So if there's six numbers, you divide it with six by adding all of these, and that's going to give you the average. This is something I don't want to get into too much. You can see it. It's in the book. What is median? Okay. Um, and then terms like the range, for instance, standard deviation. Range is anything that is talking about uh, 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 the area between two numbers, or given the x and y axis. The range is, for instance, over here, this is x axis, this is this is y, this is x. Range is all the way up to number 7, from number 8. So from 8 to 7, this is the range. Okay, like this. Same is the range over here. And what is in between is the density of in the range. So you could see these blocks, that is indicative of what is the dispersion within the range. Okay, right. I'm just giving you generic concepts right now. That's all you need to know. It's not going to ask you to calculate the range. We're not going to ask you to calculate the standard deviation, but to at least looking at the figure or the diagram, you should know what it is saying. When it says range, then I told you what this is. Okay. And when it's going to talk about standard deviation, what does it mean? Standard deviation means that you create a standard or a point, which is a fixed point, and anything that is going to be compared with that fixed point would have a deviation from the fixed point. And deviation can be in percentage, like how many percent on the right hand side, how many percent on the left hand side, on x and y axis. That's going to give a deviation. As an example, if we look at this diagram, you could see that supposing this middle one, or this part, or this block where I'm pointing to, is the mean or the average, and whatever is on the right of it is a positive deviation in terms of percentage, like how many percent it is away from the main or the standard. So if the standard or the mean is this block, whatever is on the right hand side and goes up to the arrow that is ending over here in this block, or the third block from the first one. See, this is the first one, this is the second, this is the third one. This is a deviation of, let's say, 68.26%. Okay. And what is on the left is a negative deviation, because this parabola or this thing is coming down. And what is going down on the right hand side is on the positive side. What is on the left hand side is on the negative side. So deviation, just the definition. The term relative change and relative difference are used to compare two quantities while considering the size of the things being compared in quantitative computations. Don't get confused with it. Don't think that it is making your life more complicated. Just think of deviation as a measurement of something which is identified with the numbers given in terms of percentage for what is considered as a standard versus where it is differentiated, or where it is maintaining a distance from the standard. So deviation is anything that deviates from the standard. Okay. Univariate is one number, bivariate is two number, multivariates is more than two numbers. That is all, nothing more to it. When you practice with the Q&As that is given to you in your practice tests, you would understand that there is no complication given to you, or you're not tested on calculating anything in terms of statistical methods. All you would do is look at the diagrams and relate that, or somehow with your best memory, understand it with reference to these terminologies we use. We use ranges, we use standard deviations. Okay. We use mean, mode, and median. That's all you have to think about. Now, what it means and how you can identify with the charts that will be asked for you to give it a name. Standard deviation, the range, mean, mode, and median. That's all. So these are all the traditional research method that we got done with. In fact, we covered a little bit in module 3 that has to do with the business of research. So in the next class, when we meet, we'll be doing business of research and see if we can finish it this week. After that, we have only one module, that is internet law and ethics, that we need to finish. So that's about it. And if no questions, we'll finish here. Tristan? All right. Thank you as well. See you later. See you next time. Take care. Good night and good evening.